I'm Tara Van Zandt Chambers. I'm at Michigan State, and it is my honor to welcome you to this morning's presidential address. What I'd like to do is bring up past President April Peters Hawkins, who will introduce our president, Mariela Rodriguez. Come on up, April.
As is my customary greeting, good morning, beautiful people.
Good morning.
I love it. I'm April Peters Hawkins. I'm from the University of Houston. Go Cougs. Got a few Cougs in the house. And it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce Mariela Rodriguez, our speaker of the hour. So I'm going to do this in two parts. I'm going to give you her formal bio, because I think it's important to acknowledge what people have done professionally in a formal way. And then I'm going to give you a few thoughts I have about Mariela as I've come to know her over the past several years. So first, the formal piece. Mariela A. Rodriguez is a professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at the University of Texas at San Antonio. You brought a couple people with you? She has been in that position for 14 years. She currently holds an administrative appointment as an associate dean of the UTSA Graduate School. Mariela earned her PhD in educational administration from New Mexico State University, where she studied as a W.K. Kellogg Fellow through the Hispanic Border Leadership Institute. After completing her PhD, Mariela was a faculty member at the University of Texas at Brownsville prior to joining UTSA. A couple other people? Mariela is very active in leadership organizations like UCEA, where she has served as plenum session representative and a member of the executive committee. Mariela is also involved with the state-level organization, the Texas Association of Chicanos in Higher Education, where she served on their board as the Central Region representative a few years ago. Earlier this year, that same organization awarded Mariela their Distinguished University Faculty Award. An impressive bio indeed, and I need to just ask Mariela's forgiveness for nagging her to get me this bio, but I really believe it's important to acknowledge people's professional accomplishments so that those of you who don't know her as well as some of us do have a sense of how accomplished she really is. Now, I've gotten to know Mariela over the past 6 years as a member of the executive committee. We actually cycled on about the same time, and so our work together began at that time. And as I've come to know Mariela, I've come to understand a few things about her that you may or may not know. One thing that I found particularly impressive is probably from the files of her personal life, but Mariela has the greatest vacations. Like, she takes the bucket list trips. So I kind of want to go with her next time. It's awesome. And she just takes life by the horns in that way and in other ways, and I think that's impressive. As I've come to know her as a leader, I'd like to speak to a few things about Mariela in that way. And I was thinking about how would I sum her up? You know, like, what's the one word that people would say about you? I'm always thinking about that, because that really speaks to your legacy. And as I've thought about this, the one word that I would say about Mariela is gracious. Mariela is a very gracious individual. I was joking with her on the EC earlier this week, and I said, you're the hostess with the mostest. And if you've come to know Mariela, you will understand what I mean by that. She's extremely gracious in her leadership. And I also believe in the right people in the right place at the right time. So we don't always plan our leadership journey. Often leadership finds us. And as I've thought about the events that have transpired over the course of the UCEA year and the transition that the organization is going through, Mariela is exactly the person that should be leading UCEA into this transition. So that wasn't planned per se, but I do think there's some divine element there. And your graciousness is what has been needed. And I'll just add this, you know, academic faculty, academicians are, and I'm risking offending some of you, but but I'm sorry in advance. Uh, but we're not always the easiest people to work with. And part of that is because we know enough to be dangerous. And leading folks who have so much knowledge and so much passion and so much voice can also be a challenge. And what I love about Mariela and her spirit and her graciousness is that she turns challenges into opportunity. She truly is a person who sees the glass as half full and challenges as opportunities. And so her tone, her approach, all of that is with such grace. And so we've been very lucky and blessed to have you leading the UCEA at this time for that reason. And I've been very lucky and blessed to know you not only as a colleague, but over the last 6 years as a friend. So I'm happy to have served with you. I look forward to your speech. I congratulate you on all the work that you've done professionally in your career and also through and with UCEA. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mariela Rodriguez for her presidential speech.
Thank you so much, April. I just want to make sure this is the clicker. My time here. Okay. And of course, April, thank you for those heartfelt words. Thank you, friend. Thank you also for allowing me to serve alongside you, as well as the others on the EC. Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here this morning. It has been my honor to serve as your president for the past year. I've been involved with UCEA since I was a doctoral student at New Mexico State University. The UCEA presidency has been the ultimate way for me to give back to an organization that has given so much to me. And so I thank UCEA. Today for my address, I'm going to guide you through a retrospective journey. But before we launch into that, I must thank those who have made such journey possible. The title of the speech is Que por mí no quede, the impact of our actions when mentoring school leaders. And so I need to thank our mentors. I am dedicating this presidential address to the loving memory of my mother, Dora Morales Rodriguez, who was my first teacher and served as an educational assistant for students with special needs at both the elementary and high school settings. There's a song by country artist Steve Warner called There Are Holes in the Floor of Heaven. And so I pray that one of those holes has opened up this morning to allow her to share with us in this experience. Sorry. Thank you. So let's thank again those who have made this journey possible. There's more. I'd like to begin thanking my family members who are present this morning. My father, Juan Jose Rodriguez, my husband, Edwin Carrasquillo, the two most important men in my life. And so here's a part of the retrospective journey that I'll take you on with photos from Mom and Dad. And so again, definitely thank you to Dad and to Edwin for allowing me to follow my dreams and be supportive each step of the way. Thank you to my sister, Irma Riojas, and her husband, Henry, for joining us this morning. Thanks for always keeping me motivated and encouraging me to do my best. Thank you also to the members of the Rodriguez family who are here. My father is one of 13 children, and luckily half of them live in Houston, so they were able to share in this experience. So I thank you to my tias and tios who were able to join us this morning. It means so much to have you here today. And so, as academics, we all know that we also have another family. So I've got to thank my UTSA faculty familia. Thank you for allowing me to learn alongside you for the past 14 years. It's been an exciting journey, and I appreciate the support that each of you has shown me throughout the years. We are true friends, and I am blessed to work alongside you every day. And then, of course, there's my students. I do what I do because of you, and it means so much to have you present this morning. My students are my guide to do the tireless work that includes not only teaching, but research and service, because they are the tireless advocates for the children that they serve. Thank you for being my inspiration. The work that you do in schools every day to provide better learning opportunities for children in the San Antonio area serves as motivation for me to continue my own work. I have been blessed to work with so many students across the years, and these are just a few snapshots of that work. I must also recognize Laura Marcela Cardona, my intern. So here's how this story goes. Laura sent me an email over the summer asking if she could work with me as an intern for the upcoming academic year. She asked if I might have any special projects that I needed assistance with. Why, yes, I replied. There's this really big speech that I need to give in Houston in November. And so she came at a perfect time. Laura's time, energy, and words of encouragement have helped me organize today's address. The research she conducted to help me prepare has been invaluable. And I am blessed to even have a third family. Yes, a third family. Gotta thank my UCEA familia, in particular, the fellow members of the executive committee. Each of you is so talented. I'm so glad that we take this journey together. Thank you for the opportunity to grow alongside you. There are so many great memories to look back on, and yet even more memories to make. And a huge thank you in particular to Dr. Michelle Young, our outstanding UCEA Executive Director. Michelle, I met you while I was still a PhD student at New Mexico State. I'm thrilled that our friendship and professional association has continued over all of these years. You have served this organization for almost 2 decades with such grace. And thank you for being a role model for all of us. You are amazing. You have helped to shape this organization, and you have helped to shape me. Thank you. And those of you who know me well know that there's one more person that I've got to thank. There's Malu. You know that you're one of the primary reasons that I'm standing here today. You introduced me to this excellent organization and taught me the value of service and giving back. I still remember that it was 1998, my first year as a PhD student at New Mexico State, and you asked me if I was going to the UCEA convention in St. Louis that year. I replied that I wasn't, because I didn't have anything to present. You didn't miss a beat and said, "Sure you do, you're presenting with me." And the rest, as they say, is history. I have so much to be thankful to you and Keith for. You've housed me, you've fed me, you have nourished my soul. I can always count on you. You and Keith are shining examples of what academic parents should be. I love you. Now let's begin our journey. I invite you to take a walk with me along a sandy beach. We feel the warmth between our toes. We leave our footprints in the sand as we walk. It can feel soft when there are smooth patches, yet it can also feel rough when there are some rocky spots. And as we look around, we see the vast amounts of sand and notice that its grains are countless. But we'll come back to that later. Another way that sand has been used is by drawing the proverbial line in the sand. In times of battle, a line was drawn in the sand to indicate where the opposing group should not cross. A line of demarcation, a demonstration of the stance that a group or individual has taken. It signals that we won't stand for that anymore. I ask you to reflect on times when you have drawn that line in the sand. Consider what led to your decision. Was it your values, your moral code? Was it based on your own experiences? And how did you speak out? I'm going to share 3 stories with you that describe when a line in the sand has been drawn. Let me begin with a personal story. I was born and raised in Brownsville, Texas, along the US-Mexico border. On my father's side, I'm the granddaughter of Juan and Juanita Rodriguez, who raised 13 children, provided guidance and support to all of them, where all 13 have earned a high school diploma and then some. On my mother's side, I'm the granddaughter of Francisco and Emilia Morales. They raised 3 daughters and also encouraged them to earn their high school diplomas. My mother Dora and my aunt Ninfa became educators. A story that includes both of them is the one that I'd like to begin to share with you today. My mother and aunt graduated from Brownsville High School, alumni of, and were members of the infamous Golden Eagle Band. My mother played the saxophone, and my aunt played the clarinet. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. It's all good. That's my Aunt Ninfa in the center photo there. In the 1940s and 50s, the Golden Eagle Band experienced some of its most successful years. Mr. James R. Murphy was the director during the years that my mother and aunt were band members. Mom and my aunt always remembered him fondly. They considered him to be an outstanding educator who cared for his students and held high expectations for each of them. That was what they admired most about him. He was the only teacher they referred to when reminiscing about their high school days, and that was consistent. And I've always wondered if it was his influence that helped shape my mother and aunt's decision to become educators, with my mother becoming an educational assistant and my aunt becoming a secondary school teacher. They once recounted an experience returning from a band trip up north. During those years, the Golden Eagle Band was presenting in Chicago, in Ohio, and in other areas because they were a spectacular marching band. And so these members were heading back to Brownsville after one of these such presentations. Somewhere between Chicago and Brownsville, the bus full of high schoolers pulled into the parking lot of a locally owned restaurant. These hungry high schoolers raced off the bus, eager to eat a juicy hamburger and drink a sweet milkshake. The server began taking orders amid the chatter of the band members and their directors. As the server was heading to the kitchen to drop off the orders, Mr. Murphy made an observation. He called out, "Excuse me, ma'am, but not all of the kids have had their orders taken yet." She matter-of-factly replied, "We don't serve Mexicans." To which Mr. Murphy immediately announced, "Everybody back on the bus. None of us are eating here." He drew his line in the sand. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. So let's explore some of the history behind this experience. Societal attitudes towards persons of color manifested themselves in overt aggressions as well as with microaggressions, though in those times, such words that we use in our scholarship today weren't even defined. During the decades between the 1940s and the early 1960s, persons from traditionally underrepresented groups faced and challenged segregation in many areas of their lives, such as education, housing, employment, and the denial of equal access to public places. Guglielmo in 2006 acknowledged that Mexican Americans were entitled, sometimes in theory, sometimes in practice, to attend white schools, travel on white railroad cars, adopt white children, and marry white partners. They also, though, had minimal representation in political positions and encountered acts of violence. So I ask you to consider that lunch break by these high school students who had just returned from receiving accolades for their wonderful work in this outstanding marching band, and then were faced that they weren't able to eat lunch because that locally owned restaurant didn't serve Mexicans. And we go back to that line in the sand. Mr. Murphy had a choice that day. He probably could have said, well, the kids who were served, you can split your burger, and share it with the person who wasn't served. And that may have sufficed. But what was the greater lesson? The greater lesson was to get all those students out of that restaurant, back on the bus, to show solidarity for each other, right? To show spirit of teamwork, and to say, we're not going to stand for that anymore. So with societal ills in this manner, what effect did this have on the educational system? Such exclusionary acts influence educational segregation of Mexican American children in the state in where we're holding the convention today, in Texas. Research by Field found that segregation in schools in this state and in California had a particular form. Because of the incapacities or special needs associated with children who spoke Spanish and the Mexican culture, there were two types of schools: the whites-only school and the Mexican schools. Such practices of schools in Texas involve shorter school days and academic years, less rigorous curriculum, and the reinforcement of low self-esteem. Mexican schools were underfunded, had fewer resources and educational materials. The school facilities were also inferior, old, and the teachers had lower qualifications. As I was writing that section, what came to mind was that I could very easily be describing a school today. And that needs to stop. As Carter described, American educators pressed to explain the failure in school of low status and minority group children by relying on the theory of cultural deprivation. The fault was seen to lie in the socialization afforded by the home and neighborhood, and it was assumed that the child must be changed, not society or its educational institutions. But as woke educators, we understand that children don't need to be fixed. The strengths and gifts that they bring from their homes and communities must be valued in schools. It is the restrictive system in which they learn that must be collapsed and redesigned. In the 1930s, some school districts that practiced discriminatory practices in Texas argued that separate buildings for children of Mexican ancestry were a consequence of these children's peculiarities and not a violation of law. There's this wonderful book that Laura found during her research for the talk, Separate is Never Equal, the story of Silvia Mendez and her familia. And so I'm going to read a short excerpt from that. In the new trial, the Mendez family received support from the League of United Latin American Citizens, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, as it was called then, the Japanese American Citizens League, and the American Jewish Congress. These groups sent letters with information relevant to the case and asked the judge to rule in favor of the Mendez family. Silvia was so amazed that people of different backgrounds and from different parts of the country who had never met her family were getting involved in the case and trying to help. But her mother explained, "Cuando la causa es justa, los demás te siguen." When you fight for justice, others will follow. On April 15, 1947, the judges in the Court of Appeals in San Francisco ruled in favor of the Mendez family. That June, Governor Earl Warren signed the law that said all children in California were allowed to go to school together, regardless of race, ethnicity, or language. According to the University of Houston's own Guadalupe San Miguel, by the 1940s, more than 122 school districts in 59 counties had segregated schools for Mexican American children. At first, segregation was confined to the elementary grades because of the high withdrawal rates of Mexican children. When these children then sought secondary schooling, officials also established segregated facilities, but also unequal. Tejanos found Texas schools not only segregated, but also unequal. The buildings generally were older, and school equipment dilapidated, recreation space minimal and substandard, and the school equipment was inadequate. Such schooling practices compounded and set in motion tracks of low expectations for student success, limited access to high-quality instruction, and minimal opportunities for college access. To that end, almost 200 students from Edcouch Elsa High School in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas drew their own line in the sand and walked out in protest in 1968. They demanded what is a right of every student in this country, a high-quality education. Several students were suspended, and the community called for this to be remedied so that the students could return to school. The Waco News Tribune in November of '68 ran a story in which the principal at the time of Edcouch Elsa High School, Marvin Pipkin, stated, "We will not yield one iota as long as I am principal. The students will not dictate the policy." If only Mr. Pipkin had studied in one of our principal preparation programs. We are a UCEA community strong of over 100 institutions dedicated to that very mission. If only we could get our hands on Mr. Pipkin. He would have learned about culturally relevant leadership, socially just actions in classrooms, and the value of student voice in decision-making. But alas, we work with other students who will never make such a mistake as principals. In a story printed a few days later in the Brownwood Bulletin in Texas, Bob Sanchez, an attorney representing the students, told the school board, "Some of the teachers here think they are teaching a bunch of animals. Mexican Americans are not animals." And he reminded the Edcouch Elsa School Board that we, Mexican Americans, have been patient for 400 years, and that patience is wearing thin. 2 years later, 1970, there was another walkout when the students in Cristal also drew their line in the sand. Crystal City, Texas, and students in Crystal City High School also walked out because of the conditions that they were facing in their schools. These students, like those in Edcouch Elsa, also had suspensions, but argued that they felt compelled to walk out in order to make their voices heard. Both of these examples of student demonstrations are what Michelle Fine, in her recent book, Just Research in Contentious Times, calls cumulative inequity. The concept, she says, is by stating that for students facing such environments in schools, over time, how yearning for quality educators warps to anger about denied access to such educators, and how pride in self curdles to shame in miseducation. We also need to consider the educational experiences of the children of migrant farm workers and seasonal laborers in these areas of Texas and the nation. Gibbons and Bell describe the perceptions of community members with populations of migrant families in the following ways. The Mexican is a necessary nuisance, meaning that he was necessary because the culture of beets and other crops demanded him, but a nuisance simply because he was a Mexican. The local people, Gibbons and Bell said, feel practically no responsibility toward him. They see only his ability to work. Well, my father's family toiled and put hands to soil so that this great-granddaughter of Mexicans could follow her dreams and become an educator. Thank you. Students in schools today continue to learn in such harsh environments. Gandra and Orfield in 2010 published the Civil Rights Project report that compared the segregation of English learners in Arizona public schools to that Mexican room of the 1940s and 50s. No longer should we attribute these failures to children as canaries in the mines, as Guinier and Torres told us, for it is the mines, the educational systems themselves, that are toxic when students enter them. It's like quicksand that has swallowed students up, body and soul. Enough. Ya basta. Ahora, ciertas cosas solo se pueden decir en español. We have the translation here. Es mi privilegio, no es mi derecho, poder expresarme en el idioma de mis abuelos, pero con pleno reconocimiento que este idioma le pertenece al conquistador. Esa sangre mixteca que corre por mis venas, que nunca se me olvide el sufrimiento de mis antepasados, su sudor, sus lágrimas, pero también sus logros y sus enseñanzas. Sus ejemplos me han formado y educado. Que quede claro con mis acciones que yo me entregué totalmente a este trabajo de ayudar a formar directores de escuelas que guardan los éxitos de sus estudiantes en sus corazones. Quiero saber que yo lo di todo, con mi esfuerzo y con mi ejemplo, que por mí no quede. Porque la lucha sigue y no podemos descansar. Y aunque nos tropecemos con obstáculos, hay que recordar, como en la letra de René Pérez, Residente, en la canción de Calle 13, conmigo vienen los de atrás. Villa, caserío, barrio, todos los proyectos, los deformados, marginados y todos los abyectos, caminando firme, recto, directo, sin arrodillarnos, bien parados, erectos. Venimos caminando por una cuerda finita, pero a nosotros no nos tumba ni la kriptonita. Mirando al frente, vienen los de atrás. Here's a photo I took recently on the side of an apartment building in South San Antonio on my way to a school visit. It depicts Emiliano Zapata, the leader of the revolutionary movement in Mexico in 1910. He is attributed with saying, "Prefiero morir parado que vivir de rodillas. I'd rather die standing than living on my knees." Sometimes, to make a change, you've got to create a revolution. The call for proposals for the 2018 UCEA convention reminded us that many school leaders continue to interrupt the inertia of a system resistant to change, a system that remains a colonizing and oppressive space. So how are we preparing culturally competent school leaders to lead a revolution? What are we doing differently in principal preparation programs to help leaders rise up, to fight inequities and injustices? As educational leadership researchers, what are our tools for revolution? We have our teaching, our research, our publications, our presentations, and our service. Sometimes our research is deemed risky, given the vulnerable student populations that we study in a climate that is resistant to put the needs of students first. I am reminded of the motivational words by UCEA past president April Peters Hawkins in her 2017 presidential address, when she implored us, and you remember with me, to reclaim our time, to invoke notions of collective responsibility necessary in order to dismantle oppressive structures. Let's consider our collective responsibility to the public good, our scholarly contributions to the existing knowledge base in the fields of educational leadership, principal preparation, and educational policy are just a few of those components. Let's return to that sandy beach for a moment. When we walk around the shore, we leave our mark in the sand. And we also notice the marks that others who have come before us leave. As we look down, we cannot distinguish between race, creed, or color. As we all walk on this earth together, do we not all leave behind the same footprint in the sand? In her seminal book, Youth Held at the Border, Lee Patel encouraged us by stating that the work of seeing our places in a society built on differential inclusion in order to change those conditions rests upon each of us. Now, I want you to consider the impact of the footprint that you leave, the difference that you make in the lives of your students, and in turn, the lives of their school-age students nationwide. Let's think of those of us here present. Let's take the 100 UCEA member institutions dedicated to high-quality preparation across the country. With an average of 10 faculty members per institution, that makes 1,000 scholars. Let's say each of us teaches about 50 different students per year. That's an estimated 50,000 educators we impact nationwide on a yearly basis. And then each of those 50,000 educators teaches young children in their schools year after year. Let that sink in. That is the level of our impact on all of these children. This takes me back to the inspiring 2001 UCEA presidential address by my mentor, Malu Gonzalez, when she reminded us to never lose sight of children and how the adults who are supposed to work for them in education impact their very existence. Each of us has been impacting students for years. I'm going to get to a little part of the interactive section here. I would like to ask all the current and former elementary school teachers to stand. I would be among that group. Thank you. I'd like to ask all the current and former middle school teachers to stand. Thank you. And I'd like to ask all the current and former high school teachers to stand. Thank you for your continued years of making a difference. And so how do we know that we're making a difference for students? Sometimes we receive words of appreciation that remind us of our contribution to the public good. But what about those students that we never hear from? We'll never know the full impact that our work has made on them that reach is countless, like particles of sand. I invite you to consider a leadership model that I am working on. I am calling it Alma Leadership. Alma means soul. When you lead with your soul, you never stray. The model has 3 components. The first is spirit. This is what grounds us. Our core beliefs, our values, our spirit reflects what we stand for and what we will not stand for. Our spirit is in a constant state of renewal as our life experiences continue to shape the inner workings of our being. Passion is what ignites our work. It's what sets off the fire within, that spark that keeps us motivated and revolutionized. We must keep that fire burning bright so that the impact of our work will continue to be felt far and wide. But just spirit and passion alone are not enough. You must move to action. Our passion can only be fueled by what we actually do. What we do connects our spirit and passion so that our alma, our soul, is released where and when it is needed most. Our actions are what we do to help others, to bring los de atrás, those in the margins, into the light. As I bring this journey to a close, I ask you to return with me to that sandy beach in which we began. There was an educational leadership researcher walking along the beach. She saw so many starfish lying on the sand. She began picking them up carefully, and one by one, she tossed them back into the sea. A stranger came across this interesting scene and incredulously observed the researcher's actions. After watching this go on for a time, the stranger walked up to the educational leadership researcher and asked, "There are so many starfish lying on this beach. How can your actions, your research, your service, your teaching possibly make a difference?" The educational leadership researcher smiled as she threw yet another starfish back into the sea and replied, "It's making a difference to her and him and them." Each of you is that educational leadership researcher. Let your alma be your guide to continue writing that risky research, and never forget who you're writing it for. Draw your line in the sand. Thank you very much. Know that you have your UCEA community to help you draw that line in the sand. We're here to help you, and we'll stand with you on that line. Thank you very much. Thank you, Michelle, our Executive Director. Thank you. Is there an announcement or a closing? Sorry. Do I send people to their next session? Somebody? Yeah, picture. So yes, of course, I invite our UTSA familia and my familia to come forward. We'll take some family pictures. Thank you all again for your attention, and continue enjoying UCEA Convention 2018.